conversations might be had on the sidelines? Is it as simple as two people sitting in a room and discussing a topic that they want to, or is there more planning that needs to go into this?
Well, Joshua, thank you for the question. These things are generally not that simple. There's a lot of prep which gets done for many weeks in advance. And of course, there are certain leaders who bring about radical changes into the whole algorithm or into the old paradigms, like President Donald Trump. But in more normal forms of diplomacy around the world, there is a lot of exchanges of information, exchanges of messages, meetings at various levels, discussions between the ambassadors who are there in those countries and the foreign offices. And finally, you come to some sort of a blueprint for the discussions. Of course, the discussions are not limited to those aspects. And the principal interlocutor, in this case, mostly the prime ministers, or in some cases the presidents, are absolutely at, they can at their own will add or change items or discuss about other issues which are not on the agenda. There's no stopping them from doing that. But a lot of the discussions are in a very structured way. And you are also, in many cases, when the joint communique has to be issued, even that is discussed in great detail, with every full stop and every comma being discussed even before the actual meeting takes place. And after the meeting takes place, some changes are made to those statements and joint communiques. And then those statements are issued based on what actually transpired in the meetings, what is the exact reproduction of all that has happened. So it's a readout of the event as it happened. So there are, of course, it's a mix and match, but you are very clear about what are the issues which are crucial to your interest, to your areas, and you want to listen to the other partner, bilateral country leader, as to what are his points which he wishes to make. So you first start off by discussing the political issues between the two countries, meaning not the politics part of it, but how the relationship is going. And then you move on to important issues of, economy, the trade, then the military, and then you talk about the region, then you talk about geopolitics, then you talk about geostrategy, then you talk about the future, then you talk about inviting either leader to your country. So that is how it is mostly structured overall. So they go point by point through all these issues. And here we have, of course, globally also very important issues, as we had discussed earlier, the Ukraine-Russia war, the Israel-Iran war, the threat of Islamic Jihad to the world, the Chinese aggression and assertiveness, which is impacting a large number of countries, and the climate change and other issues, which are, of course, important to many countries, but may not be as important to some leaders, such as Donald Trump currently.
Yes, absolutely. Ambassador Kapoor, building on what you've just said there in terms of key topics, I do have an update to bring. A senior G7 official has said that the G7 leaders plan to issue a joint statement on Iran calling for de-escalation. That is an update that we have had. This message of de-escalation and calm and diplomacy is one that has been made by several of the leaders who will be attending, but now confirmation that the G7 leaders plan to issue a joint statement. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, how easy will that be for that joint statement to be aligned with all of the leaders who are there? Of course, escalation and wider tensions is something that nobody wants, but there might be some people who are more in support of Israel and the situation in Iran than others, namely the United States, of course, key allies with Israel. Other world leaders potentially looking at ramifications on them and impacts on them as a priority as well. How simple is it for a joint statement to be written up with so many nations, not just the 7 nations, but other invitees as well?
There are two formats possible for this joint communique, joint statement. If they limit it to the G7 group of countries as a joint statement amongst the G7, and then it may make the task a little bit easier, because the divergences of opinion within the G7 on this issue may not be very significant, and they may be able to bridge that. Whereas if they bring in all the other countries, the leaders of which are going to be participating, which includes countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Indonesia, and others, Korea, etc., then it becomes a little more difficult, because they would have their own viewpoints on the problem and their own inputs on the problem, and then it takes a little longer. India will, of course, play a very important role in any drafting, because normally if the Indian team is involved in any multilateral discussions and negotiations, on many occasions I've seen that the initial draft is put up by the Indian diplomats, and then the other countries get working on that draft, and that makes it move a little faster. But in this case, since India is not as yet officially a member of G7, it will have some role in terms of guiding the efforts and giving inputs for the draft. But I don't think it will be either requested or it will be interested to write up the initial draft. But whatever the views are, since India is a neutral country currently, importantly aligned with Israel, because for Israel it's a threat of their existence primarily, and they are fighting a war where their existence is threatened. So India supports their existence, supports their continuation as a state, as a country, and any threats to its existence is not going to be accepted by India either. So the wordings accordingly will reflect the position of India in this sphere. Thank you, Joshua.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kapoor. We do bring you some breaking news now, which relates to this key topic expected to be discussed at the G7, and that is, according to Turkey's President Erdogan and his office, Erdogan has told Trump that Turkey is ready to make every effort, including playing a facilitator role. He has urged Trump to take action immediately to prevent a disaster that could set the region on fire. Turkey's Erdogan has also welcomed US President Trump's latest statement on peace between Israel and Iran in a phone call. Ross, I will come to you on this matter. Of course, Trump in that Truth Social post earlier saying that he's looking to play a role in a peace deal like the India-Pakistan one that was made. Also saying that a deal can be done between Israel and Iran. Now Turkey also talking about playing a potential mediator role, as we have seen them do in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Could these two countries together, given their locality, given their political stance and allied nature, do you think these two nations could come together and make a real impact in the ongoing Iran-Israel tensions?
Very unlikely. Israel has very clear goals, which is to degrade or even eliminate Iran's nuclear capability. And until that mission is finished, Israel is not going to stop. And the other countries, whether it's Turkey or anyone else, there's really nothing they could say to change Prime Minister Netanyahu's mind about this topic. Netanyahu's been clear for years already that Israel would not tolerate Iran making progress towards nuclear weapons. And in his estimation, or in his judgment, the time came for military action, especially with Iran dragging its feet in the negotiations with the United States, even though the United States made a very generous offer to provide uranium enriched offshore for use in civilian nuclear power plants. Iran declined that deal, and Israel decided to take action. So it's really unlikely, I think, at this moment that any other countries could influence Netanyahu's decision-making. And it's certainly not going to be Turkey, which has been such a critic of Israel over the war in Gaza.
Ross, we do have some more breaking news on this topic to bring you and our audience. Just to update you, according to an exclusive Fox News interview, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed the presence of American troops in their latest clash with Iran. The Israeli Prime Minister has stated that American pilots are shooting down drones headed towards Israel. This could have major ramifications, as Iran had previously warned the US, UK and France that their bases and ships in the region will be targeted if they help stop Tehran's strikes on Israel. Ross, I come back to you. This huge news could have potential consequences. We've just said what Iran has threatened to do, but if this is the case, this is direct US involvement in these tensions between Iran and Israel, this war between Iran and Israel. That's the antithesis to what Turkey have said, what President Erdogan said there. This surely isn't a move towards peace. This is surely a move towards provocation, given what we've heard from the Iranians.
The United States is not going to see it as a provocation. The United States is going to see it as coming to the defense of its ally, Israel. And keep in mind that the previous time that Iran launched missiles or drones towards Israel, the United States and other countries also came to Israel's aid as well. So if it is true that United States resources, whether that's naval resources or Air Force resources, are being used to defend Israel, it comes as a surprise to no one. But President Trump has also made it very clear that if Iran attacks American interests or American resources in the region, America will respond. So I think the Iranian leadership's got to be very, very careful here.
Yes, what would a US response look like, Ross? We've seen removal of personnel from bases within the region already. That came before Israel's Friday action that we saw across Iran. Does this mean that there is a potential for US strikes on Iran, as Trump has threatened since the start of discussion over a potential US-Iranian nuclear deal if a deal couldn't be agreed? Iran say the talks are now off the table. So is this just the natural next step in that promise that Trump made?
If Iran was to send missiles or drones towards United States ships or bases in the Persian Gulf or Middle East, then the United States is going to attack from where those missiles and drones came from. They will attack the Iranian bases where those missiles and drones were launched. And we'll have a war between Israel and the United States on one side and Iran on the other. So that's why I said Iran has to think very, very carefully. Even if the United States is assisting Israel in taking out Iran's missiles and drones, I think Iran needs to be very careful about attacking any United States bases or ships in the region. That would be a very big mistake and a very risky action by Iran.
Yes, Ross, I do have some more breaking news. Building off that last update that we gave you in the same interview when asked about a Reuters report that Trump vetoed the Israeli plan to kill Iran's supreme leader, Netanyahu said that he is not going to get into that. Let me just repeat that there for you. In the same interview when asked about a Reuters report that Trump has vetoed an Israeli plan to kill Iran's supreme leader, Benjamin Netanyahu said that he is not going to get into that. Ross, we have a minute or so left. Does this show Israeli intentions? If this Reuters report is true, Benjamin Netanyahu avoiding answering that question. We understand from Marco Rubio that these attacks were happening anyway and the US weren't involved. We know that these attacks on Friday had been months in planning. Is this a clear agenda potentially from Israel on what they want out of this military action and what ultimately their goal is?
Well, we have to keep in mind that Iran has been the weapons provider and funder to a number of terrorist groups that have been attacking Israel. So it would make sense for Israel to attack the location and the leadership from where that terrorist funding and weapons come from. And Iran has funded the Houthis, it's funded and armed Hamas and Hezbollah and groups in Syria. So it would become as no surprise that Israel will consider the supreme leader as a target as well.
Ross, thank you ever so much for spending so long with us talking about all the geopolitical ramifications. Also, thank you to Ambassador Kapoor. Join us shortly where we'll continue to dissect this upcoming G7 summit in Alberta, Canada.
I'm Megha Sharma and I'm in these gorgeous locales of Kananaskis. Kananaskis is the location where the G7 Leaders Summit is taking place between June 15th and June 17th. The global heads of the biggest economies of the world are going to descend in this place, including the United States President Donald Trump, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. It is a summit that is going to be overshadowed by the Israel-US-Iranian conflict. It is going to be overshadowed by the Ukraine-Russian tensions. It is going to be overshadowed by the Gaza-Israel conflict taking place in the Middle East. So stay tuned on NewsX World with me as I bring you the latest updates from the G7 Leaders Summit.